Hujambo Espresso Talk Today community. It's Amma Robin here. Aquaba to the show. Welcome to the Espresso Talk Today show. Thank you so much for joining us today for this uncommon conversation. Today, the ETT team is meeting with Ms. Leslie Jones, founder and director of the groundbreaking website, the107.org. Some of you might already know about this incredible website. For those of you who don't, let me give you a hint. You know how much I love riddles and quizzes, so you're just going to have to bear with me. Here's your question. What do Dr. Martin Luther King, Thurgood Marshall, Toni Morrison, Oprah Winfrey, Chadwick Boseman, Debbie Allen, Alice Walker, Jesse Jackson, Samuel Jackson, I'm going to keep going here, Ralph Ellison, Langston Hughes, Katherine Johnson, from Hidden Figures, Booker T. Washington, Nikki Giovanni, Spike Lee, W.E.B. Du Bois, and today's guest on our show, Leslie Jones, have in common? What do they all have in common? If you didn't guess, I'll tell you. They all went to an historically Black college or university, what we lovingly call an HBCU. And this is the topic for today's show. We're having an introduction to the HBCUs. Why were they founded? How many are there? What's special about them? Are they actually good schools? What is it like attending an HBCU? Those are all great questions, and Leslie Jones is here today to introduce you to the HBCUs and to answer all of those questions. Ben is joining us today for this uncommon conversation. He's going to arrive in just a minute. While we wait for him, let me introduce you to our esteemed guest. Leslie Jones is, as I said, the founder and director of the website called the107.org. That's the 100-7.org. This is a website that's dedicated to positively promoting the nation's historically Black colleges and universities. The 107.org, though, is more than just a listing of the country's 107 HBCUs. It is an innovative and welcoming experience for anyone interested in learning about each school, its history, its background, and the special programs that it offers. It is also the first and the only searchable database of all the academic programs offered by the HBCUs. The website, you get so much information here. The website also gives current news and updates on the HBCUs, the legends who attended them, many, many more than I just listed, the special programs offered, and just about anything or everything that a prospective student would need to know. Its founder, Leslie Jones, is actually a double HBCU graduate herself. I won't tell you more about that. She's here to tell her own story, and it's a fantastic story. And we're honored that she's agreed to spend this time with us today. Spoiler alert, this is the first part of a larger conversation with Miss Jones that we're going to conclude next week. We're so honored that she's here with us today because she brings a wide range of knowledge and experience to the conversation, and we are just going to tap into as much of that knowledge and experience as time will permit. We're grateful for her generosity in joining us. And I'll begin by saying Asante Sana to Leslie Jones for joining us. Thank you so much. Well, it seems Ben has just arrived. So sit back, grab an espresso, and let's get started. Hey, Ben.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well, thanks.
Yeah.
You can see I am having an espresso with the special guest today. This is Leslie Jones, who's founder and director of the 107.org. So, hey,
Okay.
Leslie. Leslie, this is Ben.
Hey,
Hello.
pleasure
Nice
to
to
meet
meet
you.
you both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been really interested in learning more about HBCUs and other universities. And I know you run this fantastic website. And when I looked through it, I said, wow, it's all these different sections. I thought I've got to ask her about this. So I'm so glad that we're having this espresso and talking today.
Yeah, I am too. I love talking HBCUs.
And I understand you attended one too. Is that correct?
I did. I have 2 degrees from Howard University, which I
Yeah.
tell people is the world's greatest college. Um,
Very Howard University.
I earned my undergraduate degree from there. And then when it was time to graduate and I was looking at grad school, I wasn't ready to leave Howard. And so I stayed and got my master's degree in history from Howard as well. And it's an experience that I am truly glad that God afforded me the opportunity to have because many people don't get it. And it happened. I will say it was not my mother's first choice for me. When I was graduating from high school, Washington, D.C. was the murder capital of the world, or at least the country.
Yeah.
And so my mother was not enthusiastic about me coming to DC from Ohio. She actually wanted me to go to Florida A&M in Tallahassee.
Wow.
And I got a scholarship to Florida A&M. And so my mother said, that's where you're going. And I cried about it, even though Florida A&M is an excellent school. It was a distant second on my list. And then about 3 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail saying I had a scholarship to Howard. And so at that point, my mother's argument kind of went out the window because she didn't have to pay for Howard either. So she said, okay. And so off I went. And it was an excellent experience. Excellent. It's why I do what I do. I want more people to be able to experience what I had, whether it's at Howard or another HBCU.
So your parents didn't attend HBCUs?
No. So my father didn't go to college. My mother went to Ohio State. And when I talked to her about it, how she ended up at Ohio State, because I thought it was interesting because we grew up in an AME Zion church, and the AME Zion church has colleges. Like there's Livingstone College in North Carolina where my pastor attended. And so I was, nobody told you to go to Livingstone, or being in Ohio where there's Wilberforce or Central State. And she had an aunt, my grandmother's sister, had a nephew through marriage who attended Central State, and he would come, during the summers. And I said, nobody said go to Central State. And she went to a predominantly white high school in Cleveland. And I think part of why she made sure my brother and I were in an environment that was largely Black was because she felt that the teachers were not as interested in her. And had she gone to a predominantly Black high school, they might have taken more of an interest in what she was doing, and she would have gotten more advice versus basically what she did was follow what other people at her school were doing. And a lot of them were going to Ohio State. So she went to Ohio State. But in retrospect, and my mother was an educator for many years. In retrospect, I think she realized that wasn't the best process. And so for me, and she raised us to be surrounded by Black history and Black culture. And so going to an HBCU was the natural progression for me. And so she definitely supported that, encouraged it in her own way. It was just Howard wasn't her first choice for me. It was Florida A&M. But outside of that, she definitely, the idea of going to an HBCU was something that she definitely supported. But it wasn't what she did. But looking back, I think she would have done something different.
Right. Wow.
Interesting.
Okay. Very interesting. And yeah, I mean, I went to UCLA, and at that time I was in Northern California, and everybody was going to school in Southern California, going to college in Southern California. So I did too.
Right.
So, and I think that was probably not the best, decision process either. So, but I had a good experience. But but it's interesting to hear more about other universities, and and I wish I would have thought more deeply about the environment that I wanted to be in.
And I think a lot of people don't do that, which is part of why I do the work that I do. I talk to people. I have friends who went to colleges And they've gone on, they matriculated, they have their degree, they have their job. But when they think back about the type of experience in college they wish they had, many of them who did not go to HBCUs wish that they had taken the opportunity to attend a historically Black college. And so I want to make sure that when students and parents and educators are finding schools for young people, it's really based on who the child is. It's not simply go to your local state school, or you're really smart, you should go to an Ivy League school kind of thing, without thinking about who that person is and how they're going to develop fully. I'm always saddened when I talk to someone and they're talking about college and they're like, some of my former students, and they're not happy, did not enjoy their college experience. I always feel so bad for them. I always feel bad because I loved it. My husband actually attended, he started at Morehouse, loved it a little too much. And my mother-in-law decided he needed to come home. And then he finished at Stillman, which is a small HBCU in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Also loved that experience. And so I have an abundance of friends who attended historically Black colleges and universities, and we all loved our experience. And so when I talk to other people and they're like, oh, it was just okay. It's like, ooh, those are 4 years you can't get back,
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that wherever you end up, and that's from people who attended historically White colleges that love their experience. And so that's great. But I want to make sure that people are selecting schools and they know that when they make this decision, it's a really good chance that you're going to get there and you're going to love it and you're going to thrive. And then you're, of course, graduate and experience life the way you want to have it, but not because you just kind of went, you just made an off the cuff decision that wasn't based on anything. I work really hard with the website to make sure that I'm putting out information so that people can make a good, well-informed decision when it comes to their college choice.
Yeah. I mean, personally, when I was we'll get to the 107 because that's also very interesting. But personally, when I was making my college decisions, going to school and growing up in Belgium, HBCUs didn't even come into my head. I was really looking at either really big name schools, things like that, the places that you just kind of knew intuitively, or that, you did kind of search out. But yeah, those other places just didn't come into mind. And right now I'm thinking that would have been great. Like I really would have wanted to have that experience.
It would have been a great experience. And there are schools like Howard or Morehouse that attract a large international population. It's one thing, like you're mentioning the small population there. When you matriculate in an HBCU and you realize that the entire diaspora is on that campus, it's a beautiful experience. You meet, growing up in Ohio, most of the Black people that I grew up with, our families are all from the South, had the same path, got on a train, headed north. And a lot of my friends, families, like my mother went to college and was an educator, and I had a few other friends whose parents went to college, but a lot of them didn't. They worked in the steel industry, auto industry, and they were able to get good jobs and buy houses and buy a Cadillac when they retired and send their kids to college. But that was pretty much the same story for most people. Yeah. But when I got to Howard, I got to see Black people from everywhere, and the lives, you had people who came from just middle-class backgrounds like I did, those who grew up, who were basically doing everything on their own because they were coming from a lower income background where the parents just were not able to support them financially, those who, my great granddaddy went to Howard, my grandma went to Howard, my parents met at Howard, like the whole lineage, somebody's daddy was a state senator, somebody's mom is on television, you meet all of these different walks of Black people on this campus. And it's like I said, it's a beautiful experience. And you leave it thinking that there's nothing that Black people cannot do.
That's incredible.
And I look at the people that I went to that were at Howard when I was at Howard, and some of the things that they're doing, mayors, leading corporations and all of these different things, writing novels. I see them on television doing different things. I'm like, we were at Howard together. Like, it's a wonderful experience to know that you share that with these Black people all over the world that are doing these great things. And that's really Howard's bigger. I think it's probably more international than some HBCUs are, but generally speaking, it doesn't matter the HBCU you go to, you'll run into those same types of people while you're there. And that's the great thing about it. It's the whole, like I said, it's the diaspora in that one little small location.
Yeah,
And
I know.
you're never going to get that pretty much any other time in your life. You really
Yeah,
not.
no, like you're talking, and I ain't gonna lie, like I'm jealous. I'm really jealous of that whole thing. Like we don't
Yeah.
really have a black student union, I think even. So
Yeah.
really, I can't imagine how good that feels being around all
Right.
that.
Right. And it's the entire campus is the Black Student Union every single day. You know, it's the whole place is built for you, for your mission. And it's designed to increase the Black professional population across the world. And that's who you are. So it's specifically there. And it's no matter your background, like you have people who um I had friends who one parent was Asian, the other person was Black. One parent was Hispanic, the other person was Black. One person, parent was white. The other, so all of that, all
Mhm.
there on campus. No matter, I would meet people that say, I don't know if I'll fit in at an HBCU. I'm like, oh, yes, you will. Yes, you will. There's somebody just like you on campus. The only difference is maybe you grew up in Belgium and maybe they grew up in France, but there's somebody else there on that campus that is like you.
Yeah.
So and it's wonderful. There are people who have never had anybody else like them where they grew up, and then once they get to that HBCU campus, they realize they're not alone at all.
What are professors like? I know when I at UCLA, I felt pretty much ignored by most of the professors, but of course we had some
Mhm.
professors of color, and we flocked to them, and they were great, excellent, fantastic. When I came to school in Europe, they were a little bit more open,
Okay.
and that was great. But I wonder what are the professors like? I mean, I'm
Well,
sure it's
just like anything, it's going to vary. But generally speaking, I found them there. I had a couple of professors I really didn't like. But generally speaking, most of them are there because they know that they have a mission. And that's why they stay at their HBCU, that they're there not simply because it's a job that they could get at any other university, but it's because it's a job at an HBCU. And so they know that they're part of making history. They're training people, training future generations of Black people that are going to go out and do something. You don't necessarily know what it is right now, but later on that you're going to have a small part to play in the role that this person who changes society in whatever way they change it has. And they really believe in those missions. And that's for the Black teachers, the white, Asian, doesn't make a difference because there are a wide variety of, the majority of teachers on HBCU campus might be Black, but there are plenty of Asian, some Hispanic teachers, white teachers on a HBCU campus. But they all believe in the mission of what an HBCU is, and that's why they go and why they stay. So, and there's some professors that I've run into since I've graduated. One, her grandson and my son were in the same scout troop, so we would see each other. She's one of my history professors, so we run into each other periodically. And she, was really about the mission of, in her case, raising historians, people who would go and work in museums. She actually, ironically, my daughter's dance studio director, the woman who founded her dance studio, also has a master's degree in history from Howard. And so she trained under her as well. And so this is a woman who we were having a conversation about this a couple of years ago. She's placed former students in pretty much any Black museum in the country. She has a former student that's worked in those museums. And so that's what, she's a public historian. That's what she does. And then of course she's trained my daughter's founder of my daughter's dance studio, who also works with this project in Chicago on Black dance in Chicago. So the reach that they have is just, it's incredible. And I think they know that that's always going to be what they're doing. They're there because they believe in the mission of raising Black scholars. So that's why they're there. There are going to be some that are just really about the books and that's about it. But they make it known pretty well. I hear stories all the time from people who went to HBCUs, and they talk about the impact that professors had on their lives that just really were concerned about them. I was reading one young woman's story, and she was saying how she was a gentleman who died. He was a professor at Alabama A&M, and he passed. And so someone posted in this group that he died. And so she commented how she was in school and she had a baby. Mm-hmm. And so she left school because she had a baby. And the professor called her back and was like, look, you're coming back to school. You're going to get your degree, and we're going to figure out what we need to do with the baby, but you're not going to leave school.
That's
We're going to
incredible.
get you done.
Wow.
And there are a lot of people who are like that. I don't know if you're familiar with Jelani Cobb, who has written for like the Atlantic, New York Times, has been a professor at Howard. I think he's at Columbia now. He's older than me, but he and I were at Howard at the same time. He also has a history degree. And he was saying the same thing, how he left school because he didn't have the money. And history professor called him and was like, come on back, let's get this degree finished. And now he's out there writing books and doing all of these different things. And so there are people who have these stories constantly about how there's a professor there who just looked out for them, who knew they were struggling with something. My own cousin went to Florida A&M. His brother was killed. I think we were juniors in college, and his brother got killed. His brother was still in high school. And he always talks about how the professors really looked out for him because they knew what he was going through with his brother dying, and he had to go home and get that taken care of, but how they made sure that he was still able to graduate on time in those situations. And so there are a myriad of stories of people who were looking out for them, talking to them, and just wrap their arms around these young people who were there. Hold on, this charger, that were at school and just needed that extra love and support. People who had Thanksgiving dinner at the professor's house because they couldn't afford to go home for the holidays. And so there are people there that are looking out for them because HBCUs really believe that it's a family.
Wow.
And especially the smaller HBCUs, I think they really have that together. It's like, this is a family. Once you step foot on this campus, you're my niece. Even though your mom's somewhere else, in the country, this is what we're here to do. We're here to look after you and make sure that you actually do what you're supposed to do so that you can graduate, because we need more Black professionals out here helping to impact society.
That's fantastic.
They have that mission.
That's really beautiful to hear, like how they really embrace everyone there. Mm-hmm. But then, okay, so try to steering it to a different track. We mentioned at the beginning that you founded or you work for the 107. What is exactly the 107 and how did it get its name?
So the 107 is an organization that I started about 5 years ago with the purpose of positively promoting historically Black colleges and universities. So my focus is on sharing good news about HBCUs. And the 107 took its name from the fact that if you were to go on the Department of Education's website and they identify how many HBCUs there are, it was 107. Wow. So out of that 107, 2 of them are actually closed right now. There were 3 that were closed, but then Lewis College of Business it's reopening this spring with a new partner. And then there were 3 that weren't accredited. One just got its accreditation back, Morris Brown College, which it's got a lot of hype behind that because it's the first one to lose its accreditation and regain it. And then there's another one, Knoxville College in Tennessee, that I just read an article about. They said they're applying to renew their accreditation as well this fall. So hopefully we'll be back up, getting back closer to that 107 of schools that are actually active and open HBCUs. But that's where the name came from.
107. And what is the mission then? Like, what is y'all's primary goal, if you have one?
My primary goal is making sure people know about HBCUs and the positive things that come out of HBCUs. And so with that, my hope is that more students and more parents and educators will steer their students to HBCUs. More students will learn about HBCUs and decide that that's where they want to go. And so that we'll see an increase overall in the number of students who are returning to HBCUs, because initially that was pretty much the only place that most Black people could get an education was at HBCUs. Yeah. And then once we had the end of segregation, a lot of students decided to take opportunities elsewhere. And while just by sheer numbers, the majority of Black students are not going to be at HBCUs. It's not possible. But I would like to see a larger percentage of Black students at HBCUs.
Yeah. And I'm curious then, do you think, let's say that percentage of Black students who go to HBCUs increase, what type of social impact do you think that would have on society or the way Black people think of themselves?
That's an interesting question, because periodically I think about some of the more prominent African Americans, and I wonder what a Barack Obama would have been like had he gone to Morehouse instead of Columbia, or somebody like a Clarence Thomas, who said growing up, he's from Georgia, that he wanted to go to Morehouse and his grandfather told him he couldn't. And so he went to college in Connecticut, College of the Holy Cross, I believe he went to. What would he have become had he gone to Morehouse? instead of going to the College of the Holy Cross, because he certainly could have been a successful attorney and ended up on the Supreme Court. But would he be the type of justice that we have on the Supreme Court right now? I truly doubt that he would have. I mean, Morehouse did produce Herman Cain, but generally speaking, I don't think he'd be the person that he is right now had he gone to Morehouse instead, or gone to Howard instead of the College of the Holy Cross. So I think that if we see an increase, those people who attend HBCU, and by no means are the people who come out of HBCUs a monolith. I mean, we certainly produce conservatives and people that do a wide range of things, but the impact, because HBCUs still produce a larger percentage of Black professionals, whether it's doctors, lawyers, veterinarians, members of Congress, still an outsized number that are coming from HBCUs when you consider less than 10% of African Americans are enrolled at HBCUs. And there's only 100 out of 3,000 plus degree granting institutions in the nation. It's a very small percentage, but the impact that we have is large. And so it would definitely be greater. We'd have more professionals. And then the professionals that we have, I think the focus might be a little different on the community than it is. And that's not to say that everyone who comes from an HBCU has a huge focus on community, because clearly that's not the case. Mm-hmm. But I do think there would be some differences. Definitely a bigger impact in terms of the number of doctors and lawyers and all of those different things that we have. But yeah, it crosses my mind periodically, how different would some of our leaders be if they had attended an HBCU instead of a historically white college. It would be really interesting to see how that, we can go back in time, and especially Clarence Thomas. I think Obama, we can let him stay there. I think it would be a little different had he gone to a Howard or a Morehouse, but somebody like a Clarence Thomas, and we were able to say, no, we're going to put you here instead. I think we have a totally different outcome going on. He still might be conservative, but not the conservative that we have.
Yeah, he's beyond conservative. There's no way he's ever been a Thurgood Marshall. He just doesn't.
No, not at all. Not at all. And of course, Thurgood Marshall being a double alum of HBCUs, and he's a perfect example of the type of work that comes out of HBCUs when you look at the professors and them having a mission. Because Charles Hamilton Houston, who was the dean of Howard's Law School, really believed that they call themselves? I gotta figure out. It's social engineers. That's what it is. Howard's lawyers, they're social engineers. And while a lot of them do go get corporate jobs, they're social engineers. And so that was a quote taken from a quote by Charles Hamilton Houston. I think he said something like, a lawyer is either a pariah on society or a social engineer. And so that's what he believed he was doing. And when you look at pretty much all the civil rights legislation that came through for decades, it came through Howard's lawyers. And they were trained by Charles Hamilton Houston. And so you have people like that on HBCU campuses who really believe that that is what their mission is. So if he had, if we had gotten Clarence Thomas, a little Charles Hamilton Houston, and we'd have a different, we'd have a different court.
Yeah.
Different man.
Well, since we're back in history, let's stay there for a little bit, because I did read an interesting quote that you gave, and I said, I think gotta follow up with that. You say there is no way that you can talk about the civil rights movement without talking about HBCUs. Mm-hmm. It's impossible. And is that an overstatement, or explain the statement?
It's probably an understatement, to be honest with you. So I have my master's degree is in history, so I spend that's what I do. And if you follow me on social media, especially on Twitter, daily I tweet out Black history facts and I connect them to HBCUs. So this person attended an HBCU and this is what they did. So just like I mentioned with Charles Hamilton Houston and training all of these attorneys.
Yeah.
That's the civil rights movement right there. The legal side of it was all done by Black attorneys that came through, with the exception of someone like Constance Baker Motley and a few other people, but the bulk of them came from HBCUs. And whether it's Virginia Union or another college, and then they all a lot of them matriculated at Howard's Law School. No way to have gotten all of that work done without these Howard trained attorneys. And then of course, if you look at movements in individual cities across the South, whether it's Oklahoma, You have people who came from Langston University who were out there working for the NAACP and training young people and having an impact on the work there. If you look at the sit-in movement, which officially is credited with kicking off on February 1st, 1960, with the work of the gentleman, what they call the North Carolina A&T 4, and how they started the civil rights, started the sit-in movement, the Nashville movement, which was led by students like John Lewis, that came from Diane Nash, that came from Fisk and American Baptist College and Tennessee State. Even like Marion Barry, I live in Washington, D.C. So for those of us who are Black in Washington, D.C., Marion Barry will always have a special place, mayor for life. His later life, people have a lot of criticism for, but he really got his start as a SNCC activist. And he went to Fisk, went to Lemoyne Owen in Memphis, and then he went to Fisk. And so SNCC getting his start on the campus of Shaw University with Ella Baker, who went to Shaw University. So any movements you look at in cities across the South, it was led by students at HBCUs. People who graduated from HBCUs and came back to do the work. When we talk about the Montgomery bus boycott, obviously we talk about Martin Luther King, who went to Morehouse, Ralph Abernathy, who went to Alabama State and Clark Atlanta, but there are also the women who were behind the Montgomery bus boycott that really got it going, that don't get the attention they deserve, like Joanne Robinson. They were professors at Alabama State University. Some of them lost their jobs for the work that they were doing, because it's a state college, and so the governor runs these colleges, and so a lot of them lost their jobs over this work. But any movement you look at across the South, I don't care if it's in Tallahassee, Birmingham, New Orleans, it was student-led movements, and those students came from historically Black colleges and universities. So you can't have it. I mean, even if you want to go take that even farther and you look at the independence movement in nations in Africa against colonization, yeah, a lot of those people attended HBCUs. Nnamdi Azikiwe, who was the first president of Nigeria, went to an HBCU. Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana, he went to an HBCU.
No, I did not know that.
Yeah, there are quite a few people who started there, and I put the information out there. There, even from little small colleges. I think I tweeted maybe a week or two ago. It was a gentleman, I want to say Rwanda. I don't remember his name. I have to go look it up. But he went to what is now known as Virginia University of Lynchburg, which is a tiny HBCU in Virginia. But he is credited with starting the independence movement in his country in Africa. So wow. Just a large reach of people who came here, they were trained, and then they went back to their nations and took what they learned here and incorporated it with what they were doing there to help impact their nations. So independence movement across the world has a direct connection to HBCUs also.
Yeah, and I'm going to follow up on student activism today in just a minute. But I do want to go back to I heard that the first HBCU was Cheney in Pennsylvania. 1837. And Pennsylvania, I understand, I mean, this was during slavery, but Pennsylvania was a free state during that time.
Correct.
Yeah, so how did other universities then develop in the South during slavery? Was it really more in the Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction time?
The majority of those in the South started during Reconstruction and post-slavery. The only one that would be considered South would be what is now known as the University of the District of Columbia, which got its foundation in 1851. There was a woman, Myrtilla Minor, who started a school for colored girls, and it became a teacher training school. And so now it's over the years, of course, transformed and is now known as the University District of Columbia. But that was Washington, D.C., 1851. But the difference between Washington, D.C., 1851 and the majority of places in the South is that Washington, D.C. had a huge free Black population. And while it might not have been exciting, it wasn't something that a lot of white people wanted. It wasn't illegal for Black people to go to school, whereas throughout the South, it was illegal. So DC started a college, what became a college then in 1851, but Pennsylvania and Ohio are going to be where you find the first, what are now known as HBCUs, because they are now, they were in northern states. So even though they were segregated, which a lot of people don't realize, it wasn't illegal to get an education in northern states.
Okay, and that's interesting. but I'm just going to shift once again to another thing that I'm curious about. What are exactly the Tiny Titans?
So Tiny Titans are schools that are small, but in terms of enrollment. So they have like 1,500 students or less, but their impact is huge. You look at a school like Fisk that always hovers around like 1,000 students or less, and the people who come out of Fisk and the impact they continue to have on society is amazing. Their programs are fantastic, whether it's music, it's a liberal arts college, but whether it's music, visual arts, or business, anything, or STEM, they have an excellent STEM program. And so you look at the people that have come out of there, these schools have a huge impact. And so I think that a lot of times when we talk about HBCUs, the focus goes to what I call the usual suspects, which tend to be the larger, more well-known schools, although Spelman and Morehouse are not necessarily large, but they're very well known. And so a lot of times the attention will go to your Howard, your Hampton, Morehouse, Spelman, Florida A&M, maybe Tuskegee, North Carolina A&T, which would be the largest HBCU. The focus tends to go to those schools. But then you have these small schools that are heavy hitters. They're really out producing. You have a school like Dillard, which a couple of years ago got a lot of attention because it was graduating more African Americans with degrees in physics than much larger schools. Wow. Which, so there are these small schools that have a big impact. Actually, Dillard is one of those little tiny schools that I love. You look at their list of alumni, it's absolutely amazing. A couple of years ago, one of their alum won a Pulitzer Prize. Whoa. They have I think one of the women who's ahead at Disney went to Dillard. So they put out a lot of people who are making a big impact. So that's what the Tiny Titans are. Tougaloo, another school that's small in Mississippi that a lot of people are not familiar with by name. But when you look at like Benny Thompson, who's a member of Congress from Mississippi, he's a Tougaloo grad, very proud Tougaloo grad. There is, I'm trying to think, what's this gentleman's name? Hakeem Alusei, who is a astrophysicist who you might see on TV periodically. He's been on like Discovery Channel and a lot of different TV shows. He's a graduate of Tougaloo. And he talks about how he doesn't think he would have been successful had he not gone to a school like Tougaloo because it was small. It was able to give him exactly what he needed and then launch him off to someplace else and prepare him for that. So he went to Tougaloo, and Tougaloo, also very active in the civil rights movement, but they have produced, and it's a very small school, they produced between a third and half of all the Black doctors and lawyers in the state of Mississippi. The first Black people to go to medical school and law school at the University of Mississippi they came out of Tougaloo. And most people don't know about it because it's a small school, but you know about it when you learn history because of the people that they produce. Geraldine Hines, who just stepped down a couple of years ago from the Supreme Court, I don't think they call it Supreme Court, in Massachusetts, their highest court, first Black woman on their court, Tougaloo grad. And so there's schools like that you don't necessarily know them by name, but you know their output because they're doing great things. They're putting a lot of people out there that are out there just doing the work, and it's amazing. And so I like to talk about those schools. I like to talk about little known HBCUs because they're doing a lot of great things. And as much as I love Howard, everybody can't go to Howard. Yeah. And if you don't go to Howard, it's okay. You can go to Dillard. You can be at Tougaloo and it can still be amazing. Oakwood, I think, is another school that's on that list. It's the only Seventh-day Adventist HBCU. And a couple of unique things about Oakwood. First, they have an amazing music program. If you ever get the chance to hear their choir, the Aeolians, it's Aeolian. Okay. It'll bless you. Their choir is amazing. And then they win awards all over the world. But then they've also produced a lot of professional musicians, whether it's in opera, gospel. Little Richard went there. He's actually buried on their campus. Wow. Take Six, if you're familiar with Take Six, Brian McKnight, they went there. So their music program is phenomenal. Then they also have an outstanding pre-med program. So whenever you look at, they have a list that comes out periodically that talks about the schools that produce the most African Americans that go to medical school. Oakwood's always on that list, and it's not a big school.
Mhm.
For years it was outproducing schools like Ohio State, which is way larger and has a much, Ohio State is probably like 70,000 students. They might have 7,000 Black students at Ohio State because it's about, but Oakwood has like 1,500 Black students. And they still
Wow.
are sending more Black students to medical school than a school like Ohio State.
Yep.
So those are the schools that I think more people need to pay attention to, because they're really out there doing a lot of good work. They deserve a lot more respect than they're getting because they're tiny.
Yeah.
And so people don't really know about them, but they're really titans because they're doing some good things.
This is where we will stop for today. But this uncommon conversation is far from over. We're just getting started, but there is so much to unpack already. The main point that I took away from this discussion with Leslie Jones is that the decision of where to go to college should involve more than just considering the school that's closest to your home, or which is the highest ranked school, or where your friends are going. This is an important decision that will affect at least the next 4 years of your life. So, while you should consider the school with a good academic program, you should also consider the school with an administration that will welcome and support you, and where you can have a community of students and faculty that will welcome and support you. I agree with Leslie Jones on this point. Personally, I wish I would have thought more about those issues when considering where to attend college and law school. A school whose mission is to make sure that you graduate and to support you in your profession is worth its weight in gold. I love her quote, Leslie's quote, about being in an HBCU. You leave it thinking there's nothing Black people cannot do. I mean, that is truly special and amazing. So you see, HBCUs are incredible institutions. They have the academic programs, and Leslie really brought that out. She's going to bring it out more next week. And she's also going to talk more about certain specific HBCUs next week. She'll also address the importance of culture and community at HBCUs and the importance of the LGBTQ community at the schools. And there's actually, she's going to mention a surprising Republican senator who is a very strong supporter of the HBCUs. This is really going to be a surprise. Let me ask you this question: which president provided the most funding for the HBCUs? Obama, Trump, or Biden? Of course, I'm not going to tell you now. You're going to have to hear the answer next week. And speaking of funding, Leslie Jones is also going to provide information about how we can support the HBCUs and how supporting them actually supports our communities. There is so much more to discuss, and it promises to be an exciting show next week. Many thanks, Asante Sana, to Leslie Jones and Ben Kopanen for joining me for this uncommon conversation. We hope that you enjoyed this show, and we hope that you'll return next week to hear more about the HBCUs with Leslie Jones and the feeling that there's nothing Black people cannot do. That really strikes me. Remember to check out this amazing website, the100seven.org, the100-7.org, and send your thoughts and comments to us at team@espressotalktoday.com. Thanks again, Espresso Talk Today community, for coming through today. And remember, now more than ever, strength, soul, and reparations. Ashe.